When the original ancient audience first heard the Genesis creation account, they were not listening in a vacuum. They were completely surrounded by an ecosystem of competing mythologies that defined their understanding of the world. The prevailing worldview of the era was dominated by Sumerian and Akkadian stories, specifically the Enuma Elish, the famous Babylonian account that explains the rise of the god Marduk. These ancient myths are defined by conflict and chaos. To achieve supremacy, Marduk fights the goddess Tiamat and tears her body in half, using her upper half to form the heavens and her lower half to form the earth. The Egyptian accounts offer a similar lack of absolute power. In one story, the god Num fashions a human on a potter's wheel, but lacks the intrinsic ability to grant life, forcing him to call upon his wife to breathe existence into the clay. Across these cultures, the universal baseline for creation was divine limitation and cosmic warfare. Gods did not create through absolute will. They manipulated the grotesque remains of their enemies or relied on outside help to finish the job. Genesis 1 functions as a sharp structural polemic against this violent background. It doesn't just offer an alternative origin story, it systematically dismantles the theology of the surrounding nations. There is no conflict and no reliance on pre-existing matter. This is the origin of the theological concept creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing. Yahweh stands alone, possessing total authority over the void. God simply speaks reality into existence. This spoken command establishes an immediate paradigm of absolute sovereignty, replacing the chaotic violence of ancient myths with a display of perfect, effortless order. The text specifies that God created the heavens and the earth, a figure of speech called a merism, where two opposites denote the whole. This means the Creator's authority reaches from the immediate ancient horizon to the farthest galaxies discovered by the Hubble telescope. By replacing a chaotic cosmos with a transcendent Creator, Genesis provides the bedrock for the rest of the biblical canon. This precise order ensures that the universe is not an accident, but a deliberate design under a singular authority. The second verse of Genesis 1 identifies a specific textual problem. The earth was without form and void, a state the Hebrew text calls tohu vavohu. The framework hypothesis reveals how the creation week systematically solves this two-part problem. Over 6 days, God transforms the formless into spaces and the void into inhabitants. In the first 3 days, God forms the formless. He establishes light on day 1, the sea and air on day 2, and the dry land on day 3. In the final 3 days, he fills the void in exact correspondence. The sun and moon fill day 1, the birds and fish fill day 2, and land animals and humans fill day 3. This deliberate individual forming of humanity stands in contrast to the impersonal nature of this forward assembly line. The biblical account rejects mechanical replication in favor of a specific, intimate act of divine will. Modern interpretive models like theistic evolution or the day-age theory attempt to reconcile this timeline with Darwinian thought by viewing these days as indeterminate periods of time. Because this framework describes a deliberate, objective architecture for reality, it establishes a specific historical foundation. This ordered design culminates in the creation of a literal Adam, providing the necessary historical lineage for the theology of salvation that New Testament writers would later build upon. The climax of the 6th day is the unique creation of humanity in the Imago Dei, the image of God. This image is not a physical likeness, as God is spirit. It is an endowment of rational, moral, and spiritual capacities that distinguish humans from instinct-driven animals, allowing for reasoning and direct communion with the divine. In the ancient world, kings erected statues of their image across their empires to represent their authority in places they could not be physically present. God applies this same logic to humanity. Every human is placed on earth to be his active, living representative authority, a status that grants every individual intrinsic moral value. On the 7th day, the narrative takes a final, distinctive turn. While ancient pagan gods built physical temples to sanctify a space for their rest, Yahweh moves beyond physical monuments. As theologian Karl Barth noted, humanity is uniquely invited to participate in this divine rest, moving beyond mere creative work to share in God's own Sabbath. By establishing the Sabbath, God sanctifies time instead of space.
It proves his authority isn't bound to a geographic temple, but spans the entire duration of existence. This identity as creator is not limited to Genesis. Later biblical authors rely on this specific authority to drive their theological arguments throughout the Old Testament. In the book of Job, one of the oldest texts in the canon, the narrative reaches a climax when God finally breaks his silence to address Job's suffering. God does not answer Job with philosophical logic. Instead, he demonstrates his absolute authority over the cosmos by pointing to his creation of the untamable monsters of the earth and the foundations of the world. The Psalms repeatedly echo the vocabulary of Genesis, emphasizing that the heavens were made by the mere breath of his mouth, reinforcing the effortless nature of his power. The biblical narrative deploys specific creation verbs to highlight this active hand: bara, to create; kun, to establish; and yatsar, to form. In the prophetic books of Isaiah, the specific title bore, the creator, is invoked as the ultimate guarantee. God's role as the maker of the heavens is the direct proof of his power to act as the Redeemer. Throughout the Old Testament, the identity of the Creator is used to prove a vital point. The God with the power to form the cosmos is the only God with the power to redeem humanity. The New Testament writers did not introduce a new, separate deity. They explicitly identified Jesus Christ as the same Creator God described in the ancient Hebrew texts. Both John and Paul use language that deliberately mirrors Genesis 1. By stating that all things were created through him, the apostles position Christ as the active agent of the original creation. This historical context is vital for understanding events like Jesus calming the storm on the Sea of Galilee. When Jesus commands the elements to be still, the disciples are terrified. To them, the implication was clear. The ability to subdue the wind and the sea was an authority reserved exclusively for the Creator of the world. The entire New Testament theology of salvation relies on this connection. Jesus possesses the same unyielding authority over reality as the God who spoke the universe into existence. This theology reaches its ultimate conclusion in eschatology. The entire biblical timeline is perfectly bookended by acts of divine creation. The ancient promise in Isaiah 65 finds its fulfillment in Revelation 21, where the Apostle John witnesses the vision of a new heaven and a new earth. This theology rejects the idea of a deistic God who simply wound up the universe and walked away. Instead, the text presents an active sustainer, a God intimately involved in every physical and spiritual aspect of the world he formed. The transcendent power that spoke the first universe into existence out of nothing is the same power guaranteeing the final